I don't know about you, but I've always been very suspicious of coincidences. Perhaps I look into it too much, but I was very interested in my morning paper that this gentleman has arrived a day before another prominent German has to arrive in town, and he hasn't just arrived anywhere in town. He's arrived, as you see, in Downing Street, not long after the start of a cabinet meeting. All right, not long after the start of a cabinet meeting. So I'm wondering whether he actually did sit in the cabinet and so forth. It's always been rumoured by many Bible teachers and so forth that this man is the Antichrist. And I don't go along with that, but I certainly think he's up there. And I certainly think he's tied in with the Bavarian Illuminati. And I think it's no coincidence this man arrived about 8 hours before this prominent German arrived. And of course you know who I'm looking at here. And I've always been very interested in the role of Bavaria in the setting up of the Illuminati. We went there some years ago, and there are many, many symbols I remember in Munich, wherever we travelled, and tied in with the Bavarian symbols and so forth. And I remember that when it was set up by another prominent cleric, Adam Weishart, that he said, one of the organisations that we are going to find the hardest to infiltrate is the Roman Catholic Church. And he was right. He was absolutely right, because it seemed impregnable then. And really up till Vatican II, I don't think they could get a foot in there to get into the Catholic Church, to infiltrate it and bring in this one world order and so forth. But of course they did. And I think it's no coincidence when the Pope Pius XII died and John the 23rd came in that he inaugurated Vatican II. Now, who did he get to set up the whole thing? He set up Cardinal Augustin Beyer. Now, Beyer had been the previous Pope's private confessor. The Pope's private secretary was Monsignor Krauss, a German, and of course in the wings there was always good old Bishop Hoodle, and we talked about him many times because he was responsible for the rat run at the end of the war and certainly through the early 50s and so forth, inspiriting criminal Nazis from Germany and so forth down to Genoa with a boat passage across to South America. Now, the thing about all of this is Cardinal Beyer brought in all the Germans to set the agenda for Vatican II. People like Hans Kung, Joseph Ratzinger, this man here, nice old man with white hair, looks a nice old man there, doesn't he? Very powerful man in his day. Archbishop Cardinal Frings of Cologne, Cardinal Doffner of Munich, if my memory serves me right, and the Cardinal of Vienna, Cardinal Koenig, of course. All of these men set the agenda out for the role of the Church, the changing of the Constitution, and the whole thing would be changed around, as I see now, to bring in the one world order. And haven't they done well in 40 years? Out of this we've got this ecumenical movement, one of the most dastardly acts of bringing all the churches together to be ready for when the false prophet comes to hand over to his master, the Antichrist. You've got the other faith groups all being brought together, the Muslims and the Hindus, the Buddhists and so forth being brought together, and these interfaith groups all coming under Rome and so forth. So that's all I want to say. I think it's a coincidence that this is coming about, and I just want a little quick story because I remember Vatican II excuse me, when it was brought about. The parish I lived in those days was in South London. I remember the parish priest saying, we're going to have an open meeting this week because many of the parishioners are a bit worried about what's happening in Vatican II, what the changes are, what it's going to entail and so forth, and people are going to say, is this happening and so forth. And he said, I'm actually delighted. He said, we've got 2 priests coming down. Went along to the meeting, it was packed, absolutely packed, and there were 2 priests sitting up there, I remember, and our parish priest made an introduction. He said, delighted to have Father such and such here from the diocese from Dublin, which I always thought was very interesting. But also on the board, sitting up there to come and give us this talk, was a priest who had come from the parish, from the diocese, the Archbishop's representative. And somebody said to him, well, what does it all mean, all this Vatican II and so forth? He said, well, he said, you're going to get some change. He said, they'll probably trim the Mass, it'll probably go into English, but it'll, it won't change all that much. He said, you'll probably find that the novenas might be watered down, but they'll still have them. Benediction might survive. Much and be much the same, but there'll be some prayers brought in for world peace and so forth. And we finished that, and everybody thought, well, it sounds pretty good, not going to be much of a change here. And we got to the Q&A time, always very, very dangerous in any meeting when you get to Q&A time. And tall chap stood up at the back and he said, I'd like to make a point here, he said, because he said, I think you're wrong, Father. Oh, he said, why is that? He said, because my son is based in Rome, and he works for Reuters. And he said he's covering Vatican, the Vatican Council and so forth, and he's filing reports for the press. In those days they were based in Fleet Street. And he said it's going to be much more severe than you think. Oh, this priest's face slightly fell. He said you're going to have the Mass in English, they're going to cut it right down to about 19 minutes. He said you're probably going to have deacons come in. I mean, there's deacons. This worried them much because this sort of reminded them of the Church of England. And in those days they were the enemy of the Church of England. He said you're going to have all sorts of things happening which you never dreamed about. And this priest, I remember, said, well, the recent meeting of the archbishops, the bishops' conference as it was called, he said this was discussed and not much was known about it. And since then, in my research, and one of the people I remember reading about was Cardinal Heenan. He wrote 3 books in his autobiography, and the last one was called Crown of Thorns. And he complained in a roundabout coded way that he felt the wool had been pulled over his eyes about what was happening in Rome. He wasn't there. He wasn't setting up the agendas and so forth. But I remember one of the frequent visitors who came to see him and sort of gee him up and get him into the track to sort of go ahead and vote for all this was our good friend Cardinal Augustin Bayer, one of the architects of all of this. And I'm saying that they brought all of this in. It opened the door for the Illuminati to come in. It opened the door to bring all these churches together for the one world order under this man. He's still very active today. He must be in his 90s, but he's still very active today. And I think what is appalling that this man has come here with all this sex abuse in the church, all of these crimes, and all of these people. Look at the differential look on all of their faces. They're all politicians, and so's he. But he stands there as if to say, I come to you as a humble servant. But he's not a humble servant at all. I think he's very much in there. And here's another man who's very suspicious of the Archbishop of Canterbury, the Druid. Goodness knows what he believes. Nobody can understand what he talks about anyway. Be gone in a few years' time. What about this man's secretary? The very tall, aristocratic Monsignor George, another German. Is he the Pope's minder, working on behalf of the Illuminati to make sure he carries it all out? Or some plan being hatched out here? Unfortunately, good Catholic people, and they are good Catholic people, have no idea what's going on here. And when I saw him yesterday, I think it was in Twickenham, looking down at 2 little girls and just about to touch them on the head, I was appalled by this, because this man ought to be on the sex offenders register. Don't think he's done anything himself, but he's certainly covered up for all those monsters who did do something. Is this part of some Illuminati plot? I don't know. But I'm always suspicious of coincidences. When this man turns up, and we know that when he turned up in Clinton's White House, he was calling the shots. And now I find out he's arriving there at the start of a cabinet meeting. Only thing that went wrong with this, he went to the wrong door, folks. And the other good thing was that one of the reporters there, one of the cameramen there, was just about to go, Alan Davis, and he was just about to walk away, and I saw this big black limousine pull up. Stopped the door of number 10, and out stepped an elderly gent. This ain't no elderly gent, this is Kissinger, who I think is part of all of this plot to build us all together. Just a few reminiscences about the Vatican Council, about what's going on. The Lord's coming, but from this ministry, from James and myself, thank you. Maranatha.